Hey you guys, Erin here. I am back with another moon update for you. Today I'm going to be talking about the full moon we have coming up here on Monday, August 19th. This full moon peaks at 11:25 a.m. Pacific time and takes place in the sign of Aquarius, 27 degrees Aquarius. This is probably my favorite full moon of the year, not just this year, but every year. And the reason for that is because if we're having a full moon in the sign of Aquarius, that means that the sun is in the sign of Leo. And Leo season just happens to be my favorite season because, well, for most of us, it's right smack in the middle of summer. And in case you haven't heard me say it before yet, I love summertime. So this is a really, really wild, rebellious, intense full moon. There's a lot to break down with this full moon. I would not be surprised if something very strange went on within the next couple of weeks, not just on the day of this full moon. Maybe something will happen within a couple of days of this full moon. Something very, very well could. Something kind of rebellious or strange go on. But really, there's a strong aspect going on between Saturn and Jupiter. That goes on all the way till September. There's a square between those guys, which we haven't had that go on since 2016. And not only that, but while Saturn is squaring Jupiter, Jupiter is conjunct Mars. And we also have got a couple of T-squares going on. The moon is squaring Uranus. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on with this full moon. So this should be an interesting recording. Now, what I'm going to do in this recording is I'm going to break down how to work with this energy, how we can benefit from this kind of transit as individuals. But of course, I'm going to pull up the chart. I'm going to go through the most prominent aspects and show you where all the celestial bodies are up in the zodiac. And I'm also going to be talking about certain parts of the body that are ruled by the sign of Aquarius, because these parts of our body become more sensitive really anytime anything up in the sky transits through the sign of Aquarius. But this is a full moon in the sign of Aquarius, and we've got Pluto at 0 degrees Aquarius. So it's definitely a good idea to pay a little extra attention to these parts of our bodies during this kind of transit. So of course, I will be mentioning some potential herbal remedies to help support these parts of our body. I will also be talking about gemstones that resonate well with the sign of Aquarius, and one particular gemstone that I think is a really good idea to have around us over these next few weeks. Not only that, but it's a very affordable mineral. So I will get into that. Now, let's start by talking about how we can work with this. This is really the peak of a growth cycle. You probably have heard me say this before. Anytime we have a full moon, it's the peak of a growth cycle that began approximately 6 months ago when we had a new moon in the sign of Aquarius. Now, that was a very, very powerful new moon. I totally remember. It was so interesting, that new moon in Aquarius that happened at the beginning of this year. I was seeing people post about this on Instagram that I've never seen them take any interest in astrology before. Everybody was like, manifest with this new moon. So hopefully you guys did that. You know, anytime we have a new moon, it's time to pull out our journals and write down what kind of growth we want to experience that's related to that zodiac sign. Now, this is the full moon. So this is the peak of that growth cycle. This is a time to be thinking about, how have I grown in these ways that are related to this sign of Aquarius? But also, is there anything related to this sign of Aquarius that maybe it's not serving you, something that you want to let go of? Because really, as the moon's getting fuller, that's this growth cycle that we're all experiencing. But then at 11:25 Pacific time on Monday, August 19th, the moon will then begin to wane. And that's when we can let go of any of this Aquarius energy that may not be serving us. Okay, and not only that, but this is also, it's just an overall powerful time, because oh God, the aspects in this chart are just absolutely mind-blowing. And I really do think it's a good idea for all of us to just stay grounded as much as we can, and hence me talking about a particular gemstone that I will definitely be using for this full moon. Okay, so let's start breaking down the sign of Aquarius. This is what we call the fixed air sign. When I say fixed, what I'm talking about is an energy that doesn't like to be moving around too much. The fixed signs kind of like to get into this routine and stick with it. They don't like a lot of change. However, there's a lot going on with this full moon that shows we better be ready for change. Okay, so there's that. Now, in the element of air, this is very much about intellect. Okay, the sign of Aquarius is really like the inventor of the zodiac. Okay. The motto is I know. It's sometimes very often referred to as the genius of the zodiac. It's a hyper intellectual energy. Now, does that mean that every single person who is an Aquarius or an Aquarius rising is going to be hyper intellectual or some kind of a genius? Absolutely not. However, there are a lot of famous inventors that have their sun or their rising in the sign of Aquarius. There really just is so much more to the natal chart other than somebody's sun and rising sign, okay? But the sign of Aquarius in and of itself, it is ruled by Saturn. Traditionally, like ancient astrology, it's ruled by Saturn, which that makes sense to me, especially when you start to understand the map of the zodiac. But in modern astrology, it's ruled by Uranus, and that also makes a whole heck of a lot of sense to me. And I do think a lot of astrologers out there are on the same page that the sign of Aquarius is ruled by both. Saturn influences discipline, responsibilities. Okay, now, of course, the sign of Aquarius can come off with an ability to take care of responsibilities, but that Uranus influence is what comes in and makes this energy very unique. It's about individualism, but it's also about humanity. As I've said so many times before, I kid you not, if you put me in a room with 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 Aries or 100,000 or 10,000 Cancers or Leos or whatever it is, I can see the similarities in people that all, land in that same zodiac sign. You put me in a room full of Aquariuses and it's going to be challenging for me to know what's going on because they're all so incredibly unique from each other. However, that room full of Aquariuses would be that group of people that could come together and make stuff happen. This is really like the sign of humanitarianism. It's represented by the water bearer. Okay, the water bearer, I know a lot of people that, in fact, I've got a couple siblings who are Aquariuses that didn't know anything about astrology. And I remember way back in the day when I started studying this stuff, they were both convinced that they were water signs. And because of the name, and because it's represented by the water bearer. But the sign of Aquarius is not a water sign. It's actually incredibly different from a water sign. See, in astrology, water is very directly associated with emotions and feelings, okay? The element of air is very much more about sociability, okay? It's more, all the air signs are more about intellect. But what the water bearer does, it's got the water, okay? It changes I want to use the correct terminology here, detaches the emotions from the water and then pours the water out for all of humanity. Okay, water is always going to find its level and distribute evenly. Of course, not all information hits everybody all at the same time. Not only that, but not everybody's willing to accept new information coming out and that sort of thing. But overall, that's what this water bearer is all about. It's about pouring out the information for all of humanity. Okay. Now, with that said, how have you grown in these ways? What kind of new information have you taken on? Not only that, but I do feel like a lot of people can benefit. And I say this because this is something I went through. I have a lot of water in my chart. I'm a Pisces, Cancer moon. So for me to be able to study astrology and be able to see, when something super emotional happens, like losing my mother, my mother passed away almost 5 years ago now. That was obviously a very emotionally, turbulent time for me. But that was also, I was able to take astrology and go, oh my gosh, I can actually make sense of this. This is actually an intellectual process. This is actually something I can study and learn from the experience. That's really what this sign is all about. And again, please do not get me wrong, because I know plenty of very, very emotional Aquariuses out there, but this Aquarius energy in and of itself, like I'm saying, let's say you're an Aquarius, but your moon is in Pisces or your Pisces rising, then you're probably going to be fairly emotional. But the sign of Aquarius in and of itself, it really is about saying, wait, what can I learn from this experience rather than getting wrapped up in the emotions? Okay. So maybe that's something that you've learned to grow through. Now, not only that, but the sign of Aquarius is also very directly associated with the study of astrology being ruled by Uranus. Uranus is one of the gods of the sky, okay? And it's about the intellect that comes with the study of astrology. I think a lot of people out there just view astrology as just some spiritual woo-woo practice, which is absolutely hilarious to me. Of course, it can be looked at as a spiritual practice, but it's also incredibly scientific. It's all mathematical. That's all it really comes down to. It's a language that uses math. That's very Aquarius energy. So how have you grown in these ways? I'm sure a lot of you guys who are watching my recordings are in some way, shape, or form starting to understand astrology, or at least trying to learn astrology. That's a very Aquarius thing. So you can be honoring yourself for that growth, okay? And as far as trying to let go of something that may not be serving you, maybe you've completely detached from emotions, and maybe you might want to let some of that go. I mean, I think it's important that we all process our emotions in a healthy way. But intellect can really help with that process as long as we're kind of using the balance of both. Now, it's a very rebellious energy. The sign of Aquarius is really like the sign that is, again, for humanity. It's the sign that wants to almost like rebel against authoritarian establishments, okay? And isn't it interesting that we're going into this age of Aquarius, and I think more and more and more and more people are starting to have a little bit of more of that rebellious energy, saying, you know, whoa, government, you kind of overstepped your boundaries there, dude. So that's very Aquarius energy as well. I will never forget one of my favorite Aquarius memes was this dog. This is years ago. This is like when memes were kind of a new thing, but it just cracked me up. It was a dog, like a dog running around a beach. It was a real picture of a dog running around a beach, and it had like a stick in its mouth, but attached to that giant stick was a sign that said no dogs on the beach. And the dog's just running around on the beach holding the sign that says no dogs on the beach. That's very Aquarius energy, to rebel against that sort of thing. So how have you grown in these ways? And maybe what do you want to let go of that's not serving you, that's related to the sign of Aquarius? Not only that, but if you're somewhat familiar with your natal chart, or if you've had a reading with me, you can go back and review the video recording to see which area of your life this specifically manifests for you, okay? Like for myself, using the whole sign house system, this really does, it affects my third house, which is the house of communication. And I have noticed, I mean, not only because of these moon phases and moon cycles, but due to a lot of other things were going on in the sign of Aquarius, I've noticed I have really kind of stepped into my speaking with authority with my communication skills. Throughout my entire life, I was kind of a pushover. I still can have a tendency to be, but being able to step into stronger communication skills. For you, maybe this is coming through your house of relationships, or you're an Aquarius rising, coming through your house of self. Maybe it's coming through your house of career, your house of transformation, your house of karma, your house of physical health. If that's too much for you, then that's perfectly okay. Like if you don't have time to go and learn, see which house in your natal chart this is manifesting through, don't worry about it. Just focus on the sign of Aquarius in and of itself. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the chart now and start going through some of these aspects. Hope you guys are ready for this. Okay, so if you're new here, what I work with is something called geocentric Western astrology. So with that said, what we're looking at here is basically a snapshot of what we call the tropical zodiac at the time of this full moon. Now, the first thing I'm going to point out here is the moon at 27 degrees and 15 minutes Aquarius. That little glyph for the sign of Aquarius is actually meant to represent radio waves. That's something else to mention about the sign of Aquarius. It's very, very electrical, being ruled by Uranus. A lot of people who have a heavy dose, I've noticed a lot of Mercury in Aquarius people have strange, almost like muscle spasms or nervous system spasms, that sort of thing. Can be kind of because it's an electrical energy. That's really what the glyph is all about. Okay, now over here, we see the sun at 27 degrees Leo, 15 minutes. So we only have, what, 3.5 more days of Leo season after this full moon, which that's kind of heart-wrenching for me, but that's all right. We'll carry on. But this is what happens every time we have a full moon. The sun and the moon are exactly opposite each other in the zodiac, okay? Now, this is, where do I begin? Okay, so they're opposite each other here. Now, first of all, let's start with the sun and the sign of Leo. I do think the sun in the sign of Leo has a really big impact on our heart. That's another reason that I love the sign of Leo so much. The sign of Leo really does rule the heart. Okay, and that's something to keep in mind. I'll get deeper into this when I talk about parts of the body that the sign of Aquarius rules. But since Leo rules the heart, And the sign of Aquarius is very electrical. The whole entire toroidal field that goes around our bodies is heavily activated, especially because this right here is Mercury. Just the day before this full moon, we have something called a cazimi. Means the sun and Mercury are exactly conjunct. And this is our second one because of this year, because Mercury is in retrograde, or this cycle, I should say, because Mercury is in retrograde. Now, Mercury is the ruler of our nervous system. Mercury influences our communication skills. Mercury is, all about how we receive information, how that information is stored into our consciousness, and then how we can retrieve that information so that we can go and communicate it. And this is coming through that very courageous, playful sign of Leo. Okay. Not only that, but I'm just going to pull this up right now and show you guys really quick. I normally don't bring in asteroids. Some astrologers do, and I definitely think asteroids can be really, really important. But I also don't want to be making 3-hour videos. But since this right here is something called Vesta, which is, very close to being exactly conjunct the sun and Mercury as well. Like here's Mercury, here's the sun, and here's Vesta. Vesta is considered to be like the goddess of the hearth. Okay. Vesta is the sister of Jupiter and Juno. Okay. Vesta can have a lot to do with our home energy, has a lot to do with the flame and the cleanliness of our home and that sort of thing. Can also have a little bit to do with how you view sexual energy or sexual situations, that sort of thing. And because Vesta is so closely conjunct the sun and also Mercury, I wanted to bring that up as well. That means all of these guys are opposing the moon. The full moon is shining her light on all of these guys, and the Vesta, sun, and Mercury are beaming through the sign of Leo, which rules the heart. Okay, so this is a very, very powerful transit. Okay, then I'm going to take these asteroids away so we don't have such a busy screen here. Now, the next aspect I'm going to point out, which is absolutely ridiculous, this right here is Uranus. Okay, now Uranus is making, this is called a T-square. Okay, here's the moon coming through the sign of Aquarius. And if you remember, Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. Okay, we see this red line going from here to here. This is almost very close to being an exact square to Uranus. Oh my gosh. So the ruler of this moon, one of the rulers of this full moon, is having this incredibly strong square to the full moon. And then we've got another square going from Uranus to the sun and Mercury. Now these squares are very stressful. And I don't mean to make them sound bad. Squares can actually be really good because they make things happen. The energy of a square is actually quite similar to a Mars kind of energy. Mars is what revs things up. And, Mars is the god of war, or the influencer of war. Okay, amongst many, many other things. Mars is not, I don't mean to make Mars sound bad, but it's an aggressive aspect going from the sun and moon and Mercury to Uranus. Now, Uranus going through the sign of Taurus, it has been going through there since 2017 or 2018. Uranus influences very strange things. Uranus is what interferes with electric fields. Uranus is like what disturbs electric fields. Uranus is very strange energy, very unpredictable. But Uranus also has a lot to do with being rebellious, okay? Uranus has a lot to do with kind of being a freedom fighter. Uranus wants change. Uranus doesn't want the same thing going on and on and on, over and over and over for hundreds of years. Uranus says, hey, there's new ways of doing this. Let's think of something way more progressive. And I barely ever use the word progressive because now it's all tied in with political views. I don't mean that. I mean really what it is. It means moving forward and coming up with new ideas to do things. And going through the sign of Taurus, Taurus is like the earth of the earth sign. Okay. And now that I'm just putting puzzle pieces together, actually, the sign of Taurus is really like the sign of money. Okay. Again, amongst many, many other things, the sign of Taurus can also have a lot to do with agriculture. And now I'm thinking about it. I just saw something about how Social Securities were tapped into, Social Security numbers we're hacked into or something like that. That could be an impact that we're all experiencing from this square, especially the sun going to Uranus. I mean, that's just really, really strong stuff. Not only that, but these are all fixed signs, okay? Leo, Aquarius, and Taurus are all fixed signs. That means it's harder for them to change. That means it's harder. The fixed signs are like, oh, I don't want to change my way of doing this. That's why Uranus is actually considered very debilitated in the sign of Taurus, because Taurus is like the most slow, steady. I mean, it's represented by the bull. The bull that doesn't want to budge. It's really like the calmest of all the zodiac signs, but it's still, it's a stubborn sign. It doesn't want to budge. And here's Uranus going, you're going to change. That's the way it goes. Okay, so that's a really, really powerful combination of aspects. Okay, now the next one I'm going to point out. Let's start with, because there's so much to get into here. Let's start with Venus over here. Venus going to the sign of Virgo. So Venus is also a little debilitated here because Venus is the influencer of love and beauty and harmony and relationships. And the sign of Virgo is another intellectual energy. It's like the sign of being analytical. It's a sign about paying very close attention to detail. So Venus doesn't generally act as romantically as she would like to in the sign of Virgo, but some good things can come out of this. If you've got something near 18 degrees Virgo in your natal chart, you do have Venus coming there that very well could be bringing some soothing to whatever that thing is. Let's say your Mercury, just as an example here, your Mercury is near 18 degrees Virgo. Mercury is great in the sign of Virgo. However, it can also lead to a hyperactive nervous system. And then Venus, the soother of all those lights in the sky, she comes along and she soothes your nervous system. If that's the case, if you've got something near 18 degrees Virgo. So I just don't want to make that sound like it's a bad thing. Venus going through Virgo. It can actually be quite lovely. It just really depends on how it's hitting your own chart. But Venus just on her own up there is a little bit in a weird position here, being in the sign of Virgo, especially because we've got squares going from Venus up here to Jupiter and to Mars. Okay, Jupiter is going through Gemini. Oh boy, it's another, all the way till June of 2025. Now, even though this is another debilitated placement, Jupiter going to the sign of Gemini, the reason for that is, well, for a multitude of reasons, but Jupiter is the great expander. Okay, Jupiter wants to look at the great, grand, big picture of things. Jupiter is philosophical. Okay, the sign of Gemini is not. The sign of Gemini is another intellectual energy. It's another one that's focused on the facts, okay? It's the student of the zodiac. And meanwhile, Jupiter is more like the professor. But this can also be a really good time, especially if you've got something near, say between 15 and 20 degrees Gemini. This could be a really good time to be studying. Okay, because it's like being the student and the professor at the same time with Jupiter and Gemini, again, especially if it's hitting something in your chart. Now, this right here is Mars, which Mars, again, the god of war, the planet of war, Mars influences aggression and frustrations, and Mars in Gemini is hilarious. There's good things that can come out of it. Everybody I know who has Mars in Gemini is always super excitable. Hey, let's go here. This is a very mutable energy, the sign of Gemini. In fact, going back to Virgo, Virgo is also mutable. When I say mutable, I'm talking about basically being able to make changes, adapt into new situations. Okay, we've got quite a bit. We've got a lot of fixed and a lot of mutable energy through this full moon. Which it's like maybe a little bit of both. Again, it's going to depend on how it's hitting your own natal chart, but maybe like a beneficial way to view this, or an optimistic way to view this, is that we're being hit with influences that allow us to make the changes, and then with the fixed energy there, they're going to stay. You make the change and it'll stay. Okay, but Mars definitely can get a little frustrated in Gemini because Mars just wants to go fast, 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 furious, aggressive, dominant. And Gemini is more like, I want to go over here and over here at the same time. I want to look at what's going on over here. I want to look what's going on over here. I also want to talk about it. The sign of Gemini is really like the sign of communication. So Jupiter can jump Mars. Okay, Jupiter is the great benefic. Again, the philosopher. Mars is the god of war. Okay, and they're right next to each other, squaring Venus, who's debilitated, Then here we have Saturn going to Pisces in retrograde, which, by the way, I think I said this, Mercury's in retrograde. Oh, boy, I think it's another week and a half Mercury's in retrograde. But Saturn is also in retrograde, and I think this is going on till October. Saturn in retrograde, and through the sign of Pisces, which we've talked a lot about this. Again, so Saturn is Mr. Rigid, always wants discipline. Pisces is kind of a weepy energy. It's a very, very spiritual energy. It's the sign of oneness, okay? And Saturn kind of struggles and is like not necessarily technically debilitated, but Saturn, that's not his favorite sign to be in, because Saturn wants to be rigid, and Pisces is like the opposite of rigid. But this is also making a square up here to Jupiter and Mars. So Jupiter hasn't squared Saturn. I think it's been since 2016. It's a big deal when these guys square each other because, okay, let's break this down. So Saturn, some of you might be a little bit familiar with Greek mythology. Saturn is Kronos, who was a tyrant that was literally just devouring his own children. As soon as his wife, kind of sister wife, would have a baby, Kronos would go up and eat the baby. Well, with that, Jupiter is the only baby. His wife, Rhea, was able to escape or turn, let's just say work with magic. Let's say work with magic, and was able to save Jupiter or hide Jupiter. Jupiter was raised by Earth and sorts of things, but survived instead of Kronos eating Jupiter. And then years later, Jupiter came back and killed Kronos, fought Kronos, battled Kronos. That's a better way to say it, battled Kronos. So these guys, this is Kronos's son. Here's Kronos's son. They battled hardcore, okay? And now they're in this forceful square, this Martian kind of energy between the two of them. And Jupiter is conjunct Mars, the planet of war. This is really, really aggressive stuff coming through here, especially because here we have what, you can see that the red triangles here, those are called T-squares. That's a combination of pretty harsh aspects. That's pretty gnarly energy. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. I think it's a really good idea. Not only that, but Gemini can also be kind of what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit of an electrical energy. As I mentioned, the sign of Aquarius is very electrical energy. This is just a lot of really this is not the kind of full moon. You're not going to find me sitting outside, fully exposing myself to the energy of this full moon. Not only that, but this full moon also takes place on the first day of the Democratic National Convention. And I already put a video about this. This is hitting Kamala Harris's natal chart so powerfully. I swear, I feel like they chose that particular day to open the Democratic National Convention because of how it hits her chart, especially in the area of her life that goes over career. Now, do I think Kamala Harris is going to win the election? No, I don't think so. But I think that there's going to be some big situations around that, coming up with big changes and that sort of thing. Supposedly, anyway, this is when she's supposed to come up with policies, or her team is supposed to come up with policies. And there might be some really wild stuff that comes from that. So really, really interesting stuff going on here. And not only that, but this could also, for some people, this really could be, it's almost like, I think a lot of people are feeling a lot of stress right now, a lot of like serious tension going on for a bevy of different reasons, individual reasons, however this stuff is hitting your chart, and I do feel like most people, because of the way that these guys are all spread out, the way that everything is all spread out throughout the chart, this has got to be hitting. It's almost like something in your chart, some personal planet has got to be getting heavily activated by this. And for some people, I could definitely see why it's almost like time to make some sort of very big change in your life that's going to require like maturity. And also it could feel very sad. It could feel almost depressing. Not for everybody. For some people might be having the time of their life right now. Some people might be having the best day ever. But at the same time, this is some pretty heavy stuff here. Okay, now let me scoot myself in a little bit so we go deeper into this. So the next thing I'm going to talk about here is Neptune in retrograde at 29 degrees Pisces. We talked a little bit about this before. Neptune works beautifully in the sign of Pisces because Neptune is one of Pisces' rulers. This is very much about mysticism and oneness and spirituality, but it can also be extremely delusional. It's like this energy, Neptune going through Pisces, especially in retrograde and especially at 29 degrees, is like in trying to, oh boy, increase the delusions for people. Okay, I think a lot of people are, and I don't mean to sound mean or anything, but I do think a lot of people are kind of walking around a little bit confused and foggy and not really know what's going on. A lot of that, especially if you've got something strong in your chart and you're 29 degrees Pisces and Neptune's making it a little dreamy. But for other people, it could be your intuition could be heightened. You can be able to tap into things that you couldn't before. You might be able to have like psychic downloads. You might be having intense dreams. I had a really weird dream last night. I'm not even going to bring it up publicly. I already brought it up. I'm not going to talk about it publicly. It was a very strange dream, and I normally don't even remember my dreams, but it was just weird. Okay, and this is definitely hitting something in my chart. It's very, very close to my natal sun. Okay, now the next thing I'll talk about is Chiron over here. So Chiron, the wounded healer, the wounded warrior, is also in retrograde. A lot of retrogrades going on. I mean, honestly, okay. The simplest way I'm going to interpret this is Chiron wants us to heal, okay? And then coming through the sign of Aries. Aries is a sign of self. This has a lot to do with helping to heal ourselves, but it's in retrograde, so it might be time to reevaluate your healing journey. Something ain't working out. We've got to make a little change here. Again, making changes. This full moon has so much to do with making changes, and in a way where I really do feel like this chart in and of itself is very, it's like there's some kind of sad things that are going on, especially Saturn in Pisces, while in retrograde, and then making that really strong square. For a lot of people, that's almost like bringing up something that's been unsettled, and bringing it into your full conscious awareness. The sorrows in the world, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, like having to make adjustments to kind of rise above that. Okay, now, I mean, a lot of retrogrades, like I said, it's some reevaluating is definitely in alignment with all these celestial bodies. Okay, now, lastly, let's talk about these nodes. Okay, so the nodes, the north node is at 7 degrees Aries, the south node is at 7 degrees Libra, and they're going to be moving really slow all the way until, I think, November. It's like they're going to move like 1 degree until November, which many of you have heard me say, I don't like these nodes. I like the north node in the sign of Aries because I feel like that. So the north node is what pumps celestial energy in. Okay, it activates these nodes are very, very important. They're what make eclipses happen. They rule over the journey of our soul. And the sign of Aries is the warrior. Okay, the sign of Aries is like, let's go. It's the sign of self. It's the sign of youth. It's the sign that takes action. Okay, so I do like that north node going through the sign of Aries, but the south node the sign of Libra is the sign of justice. It's the sign of fairness. It's the sign of relationships. It's the sign of sharing your energy with somebody else. It's the sign that is about beauty. It's the sign that is very strongly associated with the sunset. And the south node is like the drain point that takes that energy away. Now, I mean, the south node can be kind of tough in any zodiac sign, but maybe it's because I so happen to be having my reverse nodal return with this transit right now. And that's a weird one where it makes you change things. It forces you to change things in your life. Look to see in your chart if you've got anything near 7 degrees Libra. If so, then that drain point is trying to drain things out of that thing that's in your chart. Okay, anything near 7 degrees Aries, it's being activated by that north node. There might be frustrations going on if you got something near, especially if you say it's like Mercury or even your sun near 7 degrees Aries, that could be definitely creating some frustrations in your life. Okay, now let's talk about Pluto. I almost left Pluto out. So Pluto here, also in retrograde at 0 degrees Aquarius. So Pluto, and this is, okay, Pluto's doing his last retrograde through the sign of Aquarius. He's going to go all the way back to 29 degrees Capricorn. And then finally, the very end of this year, Pluto moves back into that sign of Aquarius and will be there for the next 20 years. Now, when we think about this full moon, look at this chart, these T-squares. Uranus is so heavily involved. 27, the moon at 27 degrees Aquarius, Pluto at 0 degrees Aquarius. There's a lot of really strange Aquarius energy going on. Again, especially since we're going into the age of Aquarius. Well, what Pluto does is it brings a very powerful transformational process and works with extreme force at 0 degrees and in retrograde. Basically, Pluto is just freaking furious right now. Pluto is aggressive. Pluto rules the underworld, okay? And that sign of Aquarius is, again, that sign of humanitarianism. I do feel like there's some really big changes that we're going to see unfold that involve our entire civilization over these next 20 years. I mean, of course, you're going to see major changes happen over any 20-year window. But I think we are about to see some very strange things unfold. I think we're going to see things involving the AI. I think we're going to see things involving just humanity overall. I think these elections are going to really, really trigger people, especially since Pluto is going to be 29 degrees Capricorn for the election. I do think that this election, and as many of you know, I am so not a political person, but I am an astrologer. So I like to study these, worldly things that are going on. Okay. Pluto is also it's kind of a weak trine, but it is trining Uranus up here as well. Uranus is getting a lot of activity right now. Neptune is over here making a sextile to Uranus. Oh my gosh, and Uranus and Pluto are sextile to each other. These things, okay, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus are like the three that influence things that are beyond the physical body, okay? Pluto is more like the psyche, okay? Neptune is more like our psychic boundaries. Well, it really puts holes on our psychic boundaries. Neptune is very much about psychic energy, very much about spiritual energy, the spiritual body. And then up here, Uranus is more like the electrical body, okay, being Aquarius's ruler. We're going to get into that in just a moment here. Okay, so I think I covered everything I wanted to there. Let's talk about body parts. So in the body, the sign of Aquarius, it rules the lower part of the legs, like basically the calves, the ankles, the Achilles, the tendon. And a lot of times, people with a lot of Aquarius energy in their chart, or not, just people who don't have any Aquarius energy in their chart, sometimes can end up with stagnant energy going down there. I think we've all heard the term cankles before. When things get swollen, a lot of times that can have to do with liver problems as well, by the way. But people can end up with energy getting stuck down there. And one thing that I have found, I'm not a doctor, I'm not trying to offer any kind of medical advice, but one thing that I have found, I never really had that problem, but I do have, I'll just say some people who are close to me who have had that problem. And rosemary can help stimulate that stuff and bring that back up to the brain. So it's not just all stuck down in the lower parts of the legs. But also, this sign of Aquarius, being ruled by Uranus, has a massive influence on our electrical body, which there is starting to be more and more and more evidence to show what this electrical body is all about. So with that said, what grounds electricity is minerals, okay? Really anything that is high in minerals. Shilajit can be really good. Pure black Shilajit is my favorite. I didn't even think about that one before this. I was actually going to mention nettles. Nettles can be really good. I actually have a nettle tincture going. A lot of people live where nettles just grow out there. It was funny. I was out there harvesting. This is the first year I've lived on this piece of land here. And I was out there harvesting nettles, and my neighbor was out there going, "What the heck are you doing? Those things almost killed me a couple of years ago." Because they prick you. There's these little things that can make you feel like numb. And in fact, nettles can also help with inflammation. There's a lot of evidence to show that just a slight prick this is what's so interesting. When I was harvesting them, I actually rubbed up against them. I do have lower back issues. I really did some damage to my lower back when I was younger with a lot of different things. And my lower back just kind of brushed up against the nettles. And yeah, it doesn't sting immediately, but then all of a sudden I'm like, oh man, I feel it. I feel it. And it was a little uncomfortable going to sleep that night. But the next day, after sleeping through the night with the nettles that had stung my back, there was like no inflammation in my back at all. It didn't hurt at all. And I'm not saying I walk around with my back hurting all day, but it's like I can almost always kind of feel a little bit of tension in my lower back, especially, before menstrual cycle and that sort of thing is usually when I feel the tension in my lower back. But I felt nothing the day after I got stung with those nettles. But overall, nettles can be very, very grounding. Okay, so I think those are the main things I wanted to cover. Is there one other thing I wanted? Oh, prickly ash. Prickly ash can also be really good for like stabilizing the electrical body, that sort of thing. Prickly ash, you can get that in a tincture. It's not a super commonly known herb, but that is a really good one. Okay, now gemstones. So the dedicated zodiacal birthstone for the sign of Aquarius is oh my gosh, amethyst. I'm gonna call it aquamarine. Amethyst, which is a beautiful stone, definitely one of my favorite stones. Partially because it's one that is protective, but also amplifying. Not only that, but can also help like tap in. It's a very metaphysical stone, okay? As in like tapping into the ether and that sort of thing. Tapping into astrology for somebody who's studying astrology, we really, really work well with a piece of amethyst. The darker purple of the amethyst, the more protective it's going to be. The lighter it is, then it's going to be a little bit more of an amplifier. Okay, now, also, this right here is tourmalinated quartz. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. This one can also be very grounding, but can also be protective, but can also be an amplifier. Now, this is not a super common stone. It's not terribly expensive. I got this for a pretty decent price. I've had this for like, I think 10 years or something. And I think this was probably like 30, 40 bucks or something when I got it. But one of my favorite stones for sure, because it's like multi-purpose stone, protective, grounding, and amplifying. Okay, now the other one I'm going to mention here is agate. Okay, I've mentioned this before. Agate is one of my most favorite stones. It's technically Gemini's birthstone. Going back to that sign of Gemini, the motto is I think. That's another it's like constantly thinking and analyzing and that sort of thing kind of energies. And that's agate helps to calm that down. Agate is probably one of the most grounding minerals we can use. And not only that, but it's also super affordable. So these right here, this is a piece of agate right here. It's actually meant to go on a bookshelf. That's why there's this stuff right there. But I put these right in front of my computer because they protect me from the weird EMFs, protect my body from what's coming off of my devices here, my computer and whatnot. So agate would be, I feel like everybody should have a piece of agate. You could buy a teeny tiny little piece of agate for probably $2 or something like that. And not like that, but agate comes in so many different shapes and sizes and colors. There's blue lace agate is definitely one of my favorites because that's more of a like calming and can bring down inflammation. But overall, pretty much any agate is going to help to keep you protected from weird EMFs. Something else too is that with this full moon, I personally, especially if you have a lot of Aquarius energy in your natal chart, you might want to refrain from like spending a lot of time with your phone, hanging out online, especially if it's plugged in. Any kind of a device that is connected to the web, you might want to be very careful, especially right as around the time that this full moon peaks. But especially if it's plugged in, that's like extra danger zone, especially with this kind of transit that's going on. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave that there. If you would like to schedule an astrology reading, please do visit erinwageastrology.com. I do hope to hear from some of you. And until next time, namaste to all of you.